Hello everybody, good evening and welcome to another one of my nightly video blogs. I'm Cosmic Claire and I talk about interesting and unusual things about the world from perhaps different perspectives from what you might get on the mainstream. Last night I went out to see The Hobbit with a friend and it was great fun, of course, as we expected. Slightly lighter vein than The Lord of the Rings, of course. And one of the things that struck me quite powerfully in the scene in the goblins' cavern underneath the Misty Mountains, the great goblin, marvellously voiced by Barry Humphries. I thought it was Joss Ackland actually, but it was Barry Humphries, I believe. And it reminded me of how Tolkien said the goblins and orcs came to be, how they came into existence in the Silmarillion. In the Silmarillion, the various races that are made by Ilúvatar to the god of Middle-earth to populate Middle-earth after the elves had been created in the Shining Lands, in the lands that were subject to time, Middle-earth. There were obviously the race of men of Numenor, and then there were the dwarves, and then the Ents came in there somewhere, and obviously Tom Bombadil, he seemed to be around forever. But Ilúvatar did not create the orcs and the goblins. These were created by the Melkor, or rather Melkor, the Morgoth, I should say. And I believe, it's a long time since I read it now, but I'm fairly certain that Tolkien says something like that the orcs were created by the Morgoth out of elves that he had captured, and who were changed by torture and mutilation, I think are the words that Tolkien uses, or something very similar. And I can't help but think about genetic engineering, which is a kind of torture and mutilation of genomes, and it's not only being done to plants and animals, also the human race is already beginning to be transformed by technology. Now, it's okay so far as it goes with prosthetic limbs and so on and so forth. External devices to enable us to live fuller lives. Excellent. Even microchips to control Parkinson's disease. It's electrical impulse. Okay, but there's a step further beyond that, where people now. Some people have already started to get themselves microchipped, and I'm not talking about to control Parkinson's disease, but these people will be able eventually, if not already, to be permanently connected to the net. Obviously we're hearing about implanted chips being used for digital identification purposes. I believe it's going to become compulsory for dogs to be microchipped. Kind of a creeping agenda going on there, and intrusion of the silicon world into the human nervous system is not as far away as one might imagine. And there's a kind of a big philosophical question, really, as to where one's humanity would end if, say, one had a microchip implanted that would enable one to download a piece of music and play it. Now I'm a fairly kind of average kind of guitar player, and I like to kind of play stuff by artists I like, but I'm certainly nowhere in that category where I could perform their pieces with the skill and dexterity and expression that they do. Now, if I downloaded a file into an implanted chip that was designed to do this, I could play an entire concert like Jerry Garcia or Eric Clapton or somebody like that, and but really it would just be turning myself into like a player piano, just an organic media player, and this is getting into an area which is non-human. You would be becoming a machine. People are wanting to be able to have wireless internet on implanted projectors within their corneas or retinas, so that they have permanent online presence in their head, in their visual field, in their mind, in their consciousness. This is, I think, really, just an extension of what Tolkien was talking about. It's done in a kind of Brave New World sort of way, and the other side of it, Tolkien kind of so eloquently shows the organic side of it, and C.S. Lewis talks a lot about it from the sense of loss of moral values, the deconstruction of human values to the point where we are ruled by what you might call, what is just utilitarianism. One thing I noticed under the Blair government was that the way that this was creeping forward was that I realised that the opportunity to make mistakes in one's life was being reduced. Now, you might say, well, this is a perfectly alright kind of thing, but ultimately these things are all the value judgments of the people who are in control of the system. We're talking about social engineering here on a massive scale, but also working at a kind of subliminal level, creeping totalitarian tiptoe, as some people call it, so that the values of society gradually change such that we've moved from a society of fairly kind of laissez-faire values, as long as everybody respected everybody else, don't turn on each other's toes, but also be tolerant that other people, kind of have different views and like to behave in different ways, to a narrowly defined, politically correct reconstruction of values, which actually take us a long way from the what Lewis would call the values of the Tao, that have existed in cultures for thousands of years. We're being led back into a world where we thought we'd left behind, the world of jingoism and my country right or wrong, but here we are with a ruling government elite which considers it expedient to bomb civilians, and this is justified through a series of kind of moral acrobatics. And we're faced with a gradual creeping reduction of humanity. Transhumanism is a word that is used to describe this. It means going beyond being human, and the science fiction world is full of dystopian worlds where people have lost touch of their humanity, people have become cyborgs, semi-robots, and this is all gradually being infiltrated in on us, slowly and surreptitiously, and we're all being persuaded that it's all for our own good, and that everything's about safety. The world is a very, very dangerous place, lots of crazy people out there, and we've got to lock everything down into complete safety all the time, which of course ultimately means the removal of choice. And the hidden side of this is that if you're never able to make a mistake, you're never able to learn at the sharp end, so you'll find that you're always being channeled down into particular pathways. Children aren't able to spend their early years developing at home with their mother and playing in an exploratory way, the way that childhood development is supposed to go. They're taken away from their mother and bundled off to nursery schools, where they're given programmed courses of learning at as early as the age of 3 these days, I believe it is, and it's not even teaching them how to learn, it is teaching them what the programmers and the educationists want them to learn. It is programming them. It is training children. That's all education becomes these days. So we have a combination here of both the biotechnological and the social programming, which are just absolutely total expressions of the world of Brave New World, which Aldous Huxley wrote in 30 or 31. This is just being so convincingly rolled out on the population, under the guise of efficiency, safety, security, all this kind of stuff. So I just wanted to draw attention to all this, because this is designed ultimately to make humanity programmed species, a species programmed by the social engineers, the social elitists who think they know what is best for us. They know how we should best live our lives, they know what the best decisions are for us, so they program us to make those decisions, and we don't even think about them, or we're not supposed to. Or if you do step out of the system, you experience doubt and self-conflict as to whether you should feel guilty about the fact that you're not supporting this thing that you're programmed to be a hive member of, and then people get into negativity and kind of self-destructive attitudes and behaviour because they're not able to express themselves within the context of a society which does not function upon and recognise or represent the natural law of humanity and human society, which is all about doing no harm, respecting each other, honouring each other, acting with honour, courage, integrity, not lying, not stealing, all these kind of traditional things. When I talk about traditional values, I'm not talking about aberrations like homophobia and stuff like that. It's just the backwater sort of scum pond life infestations, those things. I'm talking about the great moral values of Taoism, Platonism, and so on and so forth. So we need to be on the lookout, folks. We need to look at how much this stuff is creeping into our lives. Psychiatric drugs is another one, fluoride, all these things designed to slow down the thought processes, reduce the power to consider and review things and make up your own mind about how you feel about things. Yeah, there was somebody the other day who said I wanted them to believe a certain thing. They just, obviously, they haven't watched one of my videos, because how many times have I said, it's all about thinking for yourself, folks. Think about the world we're in and look at it, and don't accept it blindly, because there's a creeping movement in the direction of closing down the minds of humanity, and we can fight back by being aware and being in our hearts and being on the lookout for this kind of stuff, so that we know what's going on around us and we know who we are. We are spiritual beings and we have our own autonomy, and this is way beyond what any coercive social system can ever imagine. Well, I'll come back to this later on, folks, but that's the world of Tolkien, C.S. Lewis and transhumanism for now. Okay, thank you for watching and listening this evening, and I'll just say, in Lakash, thank you, good night. Numenor, and then there were the dwarves, and then the Ents came in there somewhere, and obviously Tom Bomb, but he seemed to be around forever. But Iluvatar did not create the orcs and the goblins. These were created by the Melkor, or rather Melkor, the Morgoth, I should say. And what I believe, it's a long time since I read it now, but I'm fairly certain that Tolkien says something like that the orcs were created by the Morgoth in the Silmarillion. In the Silmarillion, the various races that are made by Iluvatar to the god of Middle-earth to populate Middle-earth after the elves had been created in the Shining Lands, in the lands that were subject to time, Middle-earth. There were obviously the race of men of... hello everybody, good evening, and welcome to another one of my nightly video blogs. I'm Cosmic Claire, and I talk about interesting and unusual things about the world from perhaps different perspectives from what you might get on the mainstream. Last night I went out to see The Hobbit with a friend, and it was great fun, of course, as we expected. Slightly lighter vein than The Lord of the Rings, of course. And one of the things that struck me quite powerfully in the scene in the goblins' cavern underneath the Misty Mountains, the great goblin, marvellously voiced by Barry Humphries. I thought it was Joss Ackland actually, but it was Barry Humphries, I believe. And it reminded me of how Tolkien said the goblins and orcs came to be, how they came into existence by out of elves that he had captured, and who were changed by torture and mutilation, I think are the words that Tolkien uses, or something very similar. And I can't help but think about genetic engineering, which is a kind of torture and mutilation of genomes, and it's not